Hey everyone, this is Heidi St. John. Welcome to the Heidi St. John podcast. Today, you guys are in for a treat. Bill Federer is joining me in the studio today, and we're going to talk about politics and the state of the culture and why it is so important that every person listening to this gets off the bench and onto the battlefield. You guys are going to love this conversation. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I want to say a thank you to our sponsor before I jump in. Not Consumed is sponsoring the podcast today, and they are writing family Bible studies so that your family is not consumed by the world around them, but rather grow to be like the tree that's planted by streams of water that the psalmist talks about. If you want to find out more about what they do, go to notconsumed.com/Heidi, and you can get a free 5-day family Bible study download. And if you use the coupon code Heidi, Heidi, you guys stop spelling it wrong, Heidi. If you use that coupon code at the end, you'll get 15% off your entire purchase. All right, without further ado, I want to welcome my guest to the studio. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio to you because this guy is so accomplished. He's the author of 30 books. Bill Federer is a nationally known speaker, best-selling author, and the president of Amerisearch Incorporated, a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. I would like to say that I think, Bill, I might be your biggest fan ever. This is such an honor. Thank you for joining me in the studio today.
Well, Heidi, I'm honored to be with you.
This is such a treat for me. I think the first time I ever heard you speak, I was at a conference and I was absolutely floored. I came home with a notebook worth of pages to talk to all of my teenagers about. I love the country. I'm the girl who cries at the national anthem, who's going to stand and put her hand over her heart. My grandparents taught me to love this country and the men and women who have sacrificed for it. And that just oozes out of you. I just loved it so much. Where does your passion for the country come from?
Well, the Lord.
Yep.
My dad, he was in the Army, and but when I really became a Christian as an adult, it was like turning the corner on a cornfield. So you see a cornfield and it just looks sort of random, but then you turn the corner and you see these nice, neat rows. History from a secular point of view, it's all there, but it makes no sense. Mm-hmm. But you see it from a providential perspective. It's like, this didn't happen by accident. God is working a plan. And so what's the plan? The norm for world government is gangs. Mm-hmm. And a king is nothing more than a glorified gang leader. Mm-hmm. And from Nimrod on, you have kings ruling through fear. Pharaoh, Caesars, Kaisers, sultans. It's all top down. And your worth as a person is dependent on how well you serve the guy on top. Mm-hmm. And they'll promote you and honor you, or they'll ostracize you and kick you out and kill you. And it's interesting when you read the Bible, Nimrod had the Tower of Babel. Mm-hmm. Josephus, the Jewish commentator, said Nimrod wanted to build a tower so high that if God destroyed the world again with a flood, he could survive on top. And he made everybody in town bake bricks and bring them, or he would kill them. He wanted people to fear his government more than fear God. Mm. That's the beginning of where you see fear the government or fear God. Mm-hmm. And God comes down, and in a sense, the population of the world was in that area, and he wanted to control it. In a sense, he was the first globalist. Right? He wanted to control the world's population, and God confuses the languages. The people scatter.
And God was like, hey, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah. And he scatters them into language groups that turn into nations. Lo and behold, nations were God's invention to postpone a one-world government. Wow. But every generation, you have some king or pharaoh that wants to conquer other nations, and if left unchecked, they'd have been happy to conquer them all. So in that sense, death is a blessing, and the devil has to start from scratch again. Mm-hmm. But as the centuries go on, weapons improve, and the king can kill more people. Mm-hmm. You know, you got Cain killing Abel with a rock, but then they kill with a bronze weapon, iron weapon, phalanx spear the Greeks had, scimitar sword the Muslims had, gunpowder the Chinese. You know, now we got drones and directed energy weapons and everything. Yeah. And then with technological advancements, kings can track more people. Augustus Caesar, 2 BC, wanted a worldwide tracking system. Mm-hmm. It was called the census. Mm-hmm. If he could have had access to 5G and cell phones and facial recognition software, he'd use it. Yeah. And so anybody that can plot sees that at some point it's going to max out on a global level. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said wheat and tares grow together till the harvest. But to me, I was fascinated. The first nation that we have record of that ruled itself without a king was ancient Israel. Around 1400 BC, they come out of Egypt, millions of them, and they come into the promised land. And for 4 centuries, no king? It worked because everybody was taught the law and personally accountable to God to follow him, right? And so you have an opportunity to steal, nobody's around, and then you think, God's watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates a tiny thing in your head called a conscience. If everybody in the country believes this, you can maintain order with no king, with no police, with no fear. And it worked until the priests went woke. I mean,
So you're the first person to say that to me, and I talk about this subject a lot on the show. I never thought about that. It worked until the priest went woke. We got a problem with a woke church right now, too.
Yeah, I mean, here's Eli.
All kinds of parallels.
Here's Eli, the high priest. His own sons are sleeping
mess.
with women in the very tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. Another Levite with a silver graven image. Another Levite with a concubine that gets raped to death by a bunch of sodomites, right? And there's something about that particular behavior that appears at the last stages of a people ruling themselves. This casting off the self-restraint turns into chaos, and they all go to Samuel the prophet, and they say the self-government system is not working anymore.
We want a king.
We want a king. Samuel cries, and the Lord tells him, they did not reject you, they rejected me.
Yeah.
So God's original plan for his people was to not have a king. Everybody's like have a conscience and have a personal relationship with the Lord. And now why is this story important? The kings of Europe look to the Bible for their authority, but they look to the King Saul and on part of the Bible. Divine right of kings, I'm the royal gang leader. You do what I say, I'm going to kill you. And the Puritans that founded New England looked to the pre-King Saul part of the Bible, the Hebrew Republic, millions of people, everybody taught the law and accountable to God to follow it. So they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. So King Saul is the divider between England and America.
Wow. And when you bring up Yale and Harvard, most people, by the way, this is a public service announcement. If you guys are not taking notes right now, this is your opportunity. You should just put the podcast on pause, go grab yourself a notebook and a pencil, and just like Heidi St. John, sit here and try to take notes as fast as this man is spewing great wisdom out, because you're going to learn something and you're going to go back later and you're going to want to look at those notes. I want to talk about Yale and Harvard for just a second. These some of the most, woke institutions. I was just listening to Dr. Carol Swaim this morning talk about how her dissertation was basically stolen from her, and the president of the university used it in her dissertation, but of course didn't give credit to Dr. Swaim. Plagiarism, right? When people think about these Ivy League schools, they don't think about Christianity. They don't think about godly principles, but they were founded, right, on a much different set of principles than they're operating by on today.
Right. The Harvard founding document was to train a literate clergy. Rather than sending our young men over to England, to Cambridge and Oxford, we wanted to train here. And you had to, you look in the 1600s and the requirements at the students was to believe in Jesus Christ. The purpose of your education is to know God.
And make him known.
And to go to chapel, and any students that didn't have Christian behavior were kicked out, and then after a couple decades, a bunch of Congregationalist ministers felt like Harvard was backsliding, so they wanted to start a brand new on-fire university called Yale.
That worked out really well for him.
Yeah.
And then the priest went woke.
Yeah. And so you look at New England, and they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard, and they were fascinated with this pre-King Saul covenant form of government. So it's not just top-down versus bottom-up, which is what I focus on in my book called Who is the King in America, that we don't want a top-down king run. We want the people. But if it's just the people, everybody's going to be selfish, and it's going to be chaos. And then we're going to go to Samuel the prophet and ask for a king to restore order. And so what they have is it's the people, but the people in a covenant with each other. And it works because you're accountable to God. So you get rights from God. You're fair to your neighbor because you're accountable to God. It's like a triangle. You get blessings from God. You share them with your neighbor as charity because you're doing it as unto God. And so this covenant form of government was brought to America through the churches, the New England pastors. And then it turned into the colonial governments, and it turned into our Constitution. And the word federal is Latin for covenant. We have a covenant form of government in America. It's we the people ruling ourselves bottom up, and it works because we are accountable to God and each other. And so this period of the 1600s, you had this amazing plan of the Puritans of how to have a government without a king. And we don't appreciate it until you zoom out and you see the whole history of the world is Mongolian Khans and Russian czars and Chinese emperors.
Subjugation,
and everything's
murder.
top down,
Yeah.
and you have to serve the king or he, kills you. And so the Puritans came up with this bottom-up covenant form of government. But after a century, it got a little dry. And they taught it as a plan. God has a plan for your life, your marriage, your family, church, your government. Find out what the plan is, put it into place.
Pursue it.
Go home. I mean, it was so dry that the Puritans got nicknamed Old Lights. And they even took it the next step and said, God, in his infinite wisdom, already knows who's going to wind up in heaven, so don't even bother preaching the gospel. Whoever's supposed to get saved, they'll get saved. Que sera, sera. And they stopped being evangelistic.
Boy, we see that today.
Yeah.
Boy, we see it today.
And so in the 1700s, David Brainerd was expelled from Yale because he said his professor was as spiritual as a chair. And the Yale students got reprimanded by the government in New Haven because some of them were going into town and doing terrible stuff like presenting the gospel to strangers on the street. And they weren't licensed to preach yet. And they weren't wearing a black robe. And it was like casting
that's not your
pearls
job.
before
Quit
swine.
doing it.
Yeah. And so the 1700s, you have the New Lights. And these are people that say it's more than a plan. You have to have a personal experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change and you won't do worldly things anymore, like bars and brothels and government. Wait, what was that last thing? Government, it's worldly. If you're really Christian, you're going to withdraw from worldly things like government. That's where you get this idea that churches say, well, we're more spiritual than you because we're not involved.
Right.
It's like, that idea did not come from the Puritans because back then, everybody was involved.
That is so crazy.
You literally had churches founding cities.
Yeah.
So Providence, Rhode Island was founded by the First Baptist Church in America. Hartford, Connecticut was founded by the First Congregationalist Church in America. There were no non-church members tagging along to be lazy and let them run stuff. Everybody's involved in church. Everybody's involved in the city government. They actually had one building in the middle of town called a meeting house. The word synagogue is Hebrew. It means meeting house. So the synagogue is where the rabbi would teach the law, but that's also where they would do their city business. And so in New England, in the meeting house is where the pastor would teach the Bible, but that's where they do their city government. The word polis means people, and like police. Policy is people getting along with each other. And polite is the behavior. And so politics is the business of the polis, the business of the city. And in the city of Hartford, all there was church members. So everybody's involved in church and everybody's involved in politics. In Rhode Island, in Providence, everybody's involved in the First Baptist Church and everybody's involved in the city government because it's the church founding the city.
Right.
And so to be a good Christian.
The ecclesia.
Yeah, the ecclesia, the gathering together. But when the First Great Awakening happened in the 1700s, this idea that if you're really Christian, you're not going to be involved in government. Well, that brings up an interesting scenario because if all the Christians, all the godly people withdraw themselves from government, who's left to be involved but the ungodly?
Now, who's going to fill the vacuum? Evil will fill the vacuum. And
then you see where this pietist movement came from. It's good because they emphasized a personal relationship with Jesus. So we go back to Germany. We go back to Martin Luther. 1517, he starts the Reformation because he had a personal experience with Jesus, right? The just shall live by faith. So personal, he was willing to stand up to the most powerful government leader in the world.
Changed him.
King
He wasn't
of Spain.
like that before.
Yeah.
Right. This experience he had with the living God, so powerful, so incredibly profound that it changed the trajectory of his entire life and what he felt that he was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, think of it. He's at a trial before Charles V of Spain, who's the most powerful man in the world, right? The Spanish Empire, they control all the New World. They control Portugal and Holland and parts of Italy. I mean, and he's to his face, he tells the most powerful guy in the world, unless you can prove me wrong from the scriptures. Here I stand, so help me God. I mean, very personal to Martin Luther. But some German princes have been waiting for a chance to break away from Rome and this king. And they said, this is our chance. Kingdom of mine, guess what? I just made the decision. You're all now Lutherans. And the people in the kingdom are like, okay, great, we're Lutheran. What do we believe? So for the people in the kingdom, it's not necessarily the same personal experience Martin Luther had. So a revival movement starts called pietism. As I said, being a Christian is more than doctrine, even if it's good doctrine. You have to have an experience with Jesus. When you do, your life will change. You won't do worldly things, including government. And so the revival movement was great, and they would send missionaries around the world, which was great. The Moravian missionaries.
But they're losing their homeland.
They were. And so now they did get into other countries because they promised the kings in these other countries that they weren't going to mess around with his business and his kingdom. And they're like, okay, you're no threat, come in. So it helped them. But they didn't realize that in America, we're a republic. And this message of not getting involved is producing a negligent king.
When you say, so there are people listening to this who hear the word republic, but they're like, wait, what do you mean we're a republic? Can you define it for people who are like, not sure?
Right. So the word citizen is Greek. It means co-king, co-ruler, co-sovereign. So in the city of Athens, you had 6,000 citizens, co-rulers. And so everybody had to go to the marketplace, the agora, and gather together in what's called the ecclesia. And they would all make decisions on how to run the city. There was no king telling them what to do.
Everyone was invested.
Yeah. And so when Jesus says, upon this rock I'll build my
ecclesia,
the church. It's the gathering together. It's my body. Everybody's got to be a part, an eye, an ear, a foot, right? And but in a pure democracy, every citizen had to be at every meeting every day to talk about every issue. Totally time consuming. And if you took off a couple of days and you weren't keeping up with what they're talking about, you were called an idiotus. An idiot. Hey, what are we talking about today? You haven't been keeping up. And so, but a republic is where you take care of your family and your farm, and you send someone in your place to go to the market every day to keep up with, and they're your representative. And so it's an easy way to remember. Republic begins with 3 letters, R-E-P, and representative begins with 3 letters, R-E-P. So a Republican form of government is a representative. You're still in charge. You just have subcontracted out to somebody else to go to that meeting every day and keep up with the issues and report back to you, right? And so republics could get larger because the democracy, I mean, you can only go—
Because the population grows.
Yeah, I mean, how far can you travel in a day? Maybe 10 miles, maybe 20 miles. So in Greece, they had city-states. So you had to go there to talk. But a republic, it could get larger because you didn't have to be there every day. You could send somebody in your place. And so you had the Roman Republic. And anyway, so in America, we did a hybrid where we democratically elect our representatives. And then the representatives are limited by something called the Constitution.
Hallelujah.
And then the purpose of the Constitution is to guarantee the rights mentioned in the Declaration. Now, why is this important? If it's just the state, even if it's a republic and they're giving out the rights, what they give out, they can take away. Eisenhower said, in some countries, the state claims to be the author of human rights. If the state gives rights, it can and inevitably will take away those rights. Our founding fathers had to refer to the creator in order to make the revolutionary experiment make sense. So when you have rights from a creator above the government, then the purpose of the government is to guarantee to you your creator-given rights.
So they're very intentional. You were endowed by your creator with certain unalienable rights. They start off with these very important words so that ordinary people like Heidi St. John can read that very simple language and go, oh, hey, you didn't give me my rights. God gave them to me.
Yeah, and then the purpose of the government changes to guaranteeing to you your creator. If there is no creator, where your rights come from the government, the social contract, the compact, the group, the state, the mob. And what the state giveth, the state can taketh awayeth. So in every socialist experiment, the first thing they want to do is get rid of a creator so that you don't claim you get rights from above the king's head. You know, we in the Declaration says appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intent. And you think of it, appeal. What if you lose a court case? You appeal it. What if you lose it again? You appeal it to the Supreme Court. What if you lose it there? You appeal to God. So in other words, when they were saying we're appealing to the Supreme Judge, we're going above the king's head, right? And so in America, we were founded as a republic, but over time, sort of like in ancient Israel, people get lazy. And if they're not pressing in, it's like canoeing upstream, you're actually going backwards. We're by the Columbia River, and there's a strong current. And if you're not really working hard to go upstream, and if you're going to take a rest, you're not resting, you're actually going backwards.
That's right.
You have to keep pressing in.
Well, nobody feels that more than the citizens of Washington State. I will tell you, because we have an oppressive leftist government here, and if we take our hands off of those oars for even a half a second, bam, you're losing miles an hour because you're constantly having to row against it. And I think what you're saying paints such an important picture, because for generations in this nation, we really have just taken our hands off the oars and we trusted, oh, hey, we sent those guys to Washington, or maybe we didn't have anything to do with sending those guys to Washington. We just thought that's not our business. It's not our problem. And so the Republic, which was really made for the citizens to engage, when we disengaged, the problems really began.
So in my book, Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission, I go through the 1600s, Calvinist Puritans, covenant form of government turns into our Constitution, and they're called Old Lights. And then the First Great Awakening, the New Lights, it's more than a covenant plan, it's a personal experience. But
Except government.
It's like the devil has a ditch on either side of the road. It's like It's so personal, it's only personal.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And you just worry about your own relationship and forget what kind of country you're leaving your
kids.
And
the devil doesn't care what ditch he knocks you into so long as you're in a ditch.
Yeah. And so for those who think they're holy by not being involved, I ask the question, what do you do with Numbers chapter 30? It's the silence equals consent chapter in the Bible. Half a dozen scenarios. One is if a daughter is still living in her father's house in her youth and binds herself with a vow, and the day the father hears about it, if he's silent, her vows stand. But if he disallows it, she's released from the vow and the Lord forgives her. That's come down to us as vows in a wedding ceremony. And the pastor tells the church members, if you're silent when you hear these vows, you're giving your consent to the vows.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Right. And so it's called the rule of tacit admission, T-A-C-I-T, and it's in law. Let's say you save up money, buy a rent house. A squatter moves in. If you know about it and you're silent, they can gain title to your rent house through adverse possession. It's in trademark law. You design a trademark, somebody copies it, and it's all over the internet. If you know about it and you're silent, they get to use it. It's in debt collection law. Somebody owes you money, and you're silent for 10 years, and then you try to start collecting, the judge will say you're past the statute of limitations. No money. It's even in our Constitution. Article 1, Section 7. Congress passes a bill, puts it on the president's desk. It says, if any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it. All the president has to do is let it sit on his desk and be silent for 10 days, and his silence equals his signature. Wow. And so if a church member's silence gives consent to wedding vows, it gives consent to other things. And if they're killing babies in the community and the church members are silent, they're giving their consent to the killing of babies. If they're teaching the trans agenda and the church members are silent, they're giving consent to teaching the trans agenda. I mean, think of it. Here are teachers that cannot even define woman.
Yeah.
Yet they think they can tell that the little boy is supposed to be a little girl. It's like, you can't even define girl. It makes no sense. And Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones that believes in me to stumble, better that a millstone be put around your neck and you'd be thrown in the depths of the sea. So while you're thinking, oh, we're holy, we don't get involved in politics. No, you're not holy. You're giving your silence. You're giving your consent to that evil. You're an accessory to the crime. You're going to be judged.
Yeah.
There's even a verse in the Bible that says, if any Israelite sacrifices a child to Molech, they shall be put to death. And it says, if any member of the community closes their eyes when that man sacrifices his children to Molech, I myself will set my face against him and his family and will cut them off from Israel. All you got to do is close your eyes while they kill the kid and you're cut off.
Yeah.
Proverbs 24 says, rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die.
Yeah.
Don't try to disclaim responsibility by saying you didn't know about it. For God, who knows all hearts, knows yours. He knows you knew, and he's going to hold you accountable. The Apostle Paul is standing there when Stephen is being stoned. Paul didn't say a word, but later Paul's talking to the Lord, and he says, that he knew he was guilty for the death of Stephen just by standing there silent because he knew he was giving his consent. Mordecai tells Esther, there's a mandate from the government to kill the Jews. If you're silent, you and your family will be killed and God will raise up somebody else. If you're silent, right? And then there's an interesting verse in Numbers 30, and it's Moses and Aaron are called to the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord tells Moses, gather the assembly, thou and Aaron, take the rod, speak to the rock, water will come out. Well, they gather the assembly, and Moses lifts up the rod, hits the rock twice, water comes out. End of the chapter.
He disobeys God.
Yeah, and then there's this interest, at the end of the chapter, it says, Aaron will not enter the land because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. It's like, Aaron didn't do anything. He didn't say anything the whole entire chapter.
That's the problem.
It's like, yeah, but the chapter starts off with Moses and Aaron being at the door of the tabernacle and Aaron hearing God telling Moses, speak to the rock. When Moses lifted up the rod the first time and hit the rock, it probably took Aaron by surprise. When Moses lifted up the rod the second time, Aaron knew what was coming and he was silent. He didn't say, well, Moses, hold it. No, he was silent. And in that instant, Aaron was guilty. Moses's was a sin of commission. Aaron's was a sin of omission.
Yeah.
And so there's a verse in Leviticus 5. It says that a person sins because they did not speak up, even though they were an eyewitness to a case or knew what happened. Anyone who fails to testify is guilty. And so we have to realize that when a pastor tells the church members, oh, don't get involved, just worry about your own relationship, you're telling them to be silent and give their consent to the evil and having them sin by omission. And so this is something that every parent knows, right? That you, if your kid's doing something wrong and you're silent, that kid's going to say, it's okay. They're not saying it.
I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, they're not stopping me. They're not telling me, And so it's a grown-up message to the church. It's like, okay, we need to get serious. And God cares about the kids. There's one thing I bring up is that forget all the other races. Just look at the school board races.
Boy.
And there's a clear admonition in the Bible that we are supposed to care about the children. And a generation ago, we had bus programs and bus captains, and they would go through the poor neighborhoods and knock on the doors through the week and say, hey, can we come pick your kid up on Sunday with the bus, take them to Sunday school class?
Remember the joy buses used to be in all the neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of a Church of Christ thing when I remember that growing up.
Yeah, I was in Michigan, and the couple that sponsored me, the wife said, yeah, I was 8 years old, and the Baptist church bus came and picked me up, and I went to the Sunday school, heard the gospel, and I prayed the prayer, and I got saved. Here she is in her 50s, and she still looks back to that 8-year-old. So back then, it was this understanding that God loves all the kids in the neighborhood, not just the ones that come to the church. Well, shouldn't we care about what all the kids in the neighborhood are being taught? Now, before then, the public schools were started as Protestant, and the Catholics had the parochial school. But then they pushed through in the 1960s, taking prayer out of schools and Bible reading out of schools and created a vacuum. And into that came all kinds of leftist agenda and anti-God stuff.
That,
And so it's no longer just let it go. If you're silent, you're giving your consent to these kids being taught. And again, Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones that believes me to stumble, better than a millstone be put around your neck.
It's
and thrown in the depths of
interesting
the sea.
as we're watching, what's happened in the culture, this massive shift certainly that we have seen in the last 20 years, especially as it relates to children, how most of the social ills that are happening in our country right now are really targeting children. And I think they've been able to do this because the church, who should have been the watchman on the wall for these young people, has decided, well, that's not my area. In fact, I was just on social media today and I saw a pretty prominent Christian leader say that he's more convinced than ever that the church should only focus on salvation, because if people would just get saved, they would do the right thing. If they would just get saved, Jesus would fix it. And my answer to that is sort of, well, it's twofold, but I wonder what you think about this. I was thinking about responding back to this leader and saying, what about all of the hundreds of thousands of people who I would say are professing Christians who are not doing what is right? What about those people who say, yes, I believe in God and I've accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I'm still being quiet while millions of babies are being dismembered in their mother's womb, and millions upon millions of children are being infected by this ideology of gender theory and radical gender theory? What do you say to that? This line, I hear it all the time, Bill. People who say we should only focus on the gospel because if we can get people saved and they can just have an encounter with the living God, they'll make the right decision.
Yeah, it's sort of sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that don't get involved in government because it's worldly.
Right.
Well, why is it worldly? Because we're not involved in government.
Right.
Right. If all the spiritual people say don't get involved, then who's going to be left but the non-spiritual?
Right.
And what are they going to do? If they're not, they're going to be ambitious and they're going to become power hungry and turn into tyrants, and they're going to rule top down, and they're going to do what? Oppress Christians. You know, when Saul took over, he didn't just rule as a tyrant. He called all the priests. David went to the priests at this town called Nob, and the priests gave him some bread and the sword of Goliath. And so David calls all the priests to him. And as soon as they show up, he turns to his soldiers and he says, kill them. And the soldiers hesitate. And Doeg the Edomite says, I'll kill him, goes in there and kills them all. What just happened? The soldiers were still operating under the old system where each person was taught the law and personally accountable to God to follow it. So they still had a conscience. They were hesitating. Where Doeg says, King, I'm going to surrender my conscience to you, the government. You tell me to kill, I'll kill. Tell me to kill the baby in the womb, I'll kill it. Tell me there's no more male and female. Tell me kids can be furries. So I'm just a bunch of mush. You blow the trumpet, I'll bow to your statue.
Yeah, you stand on I put a dot on the floor of Walmart and I'll stand on it. Right?
You know,
We're sheep.
I was thinking of, imagine a guy watching football and you say, when was the last time you told your wife you love her? And he's like, I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, okay. When was the last time you did anything to show your wife you love her? It's like, I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, dude, we need to have a little marriage counseling here. People say, God knows my heart. Yes, he does. And he wants to hear some words out of your mouth, and he wants to see some actions. And if Christians are not going to play a good offense, at least play a good defense. If you're not taking serious winning the world for Christ, at least don't keep your mouth shut when they're going to mutilate little innocent kids.
Come on.
And for you to somehow think you're spiritual while they're mutilating these kids, it's beyond me. And I think God is pushing the world to a decision-making moment. Right? You know, I mean, again, if a guy says, oh, I love that girl, and he's looking at her through a window and she's getting beat up on the parking lot, it's like, oh, I love her. And it's like, you don't love her. If you did, you would do something. You would run out there. And people say, oh, I love Jesus, but I'm not going to do anything to rescue these little innocent kids. It's like, you don't love Jesus, right? You love the praise of men more than the praises of God. You know, I think God is pushing the world to a decision-making moment to see who will be quiet and who says, I just can't be quiet anymore. There's fire in my bones. I have to speak up. I have to, and then you look at the Bible. Here's Peter. The Sanhedrin says, we gave you strict orders not to speak in this name. And he says, better to obey God rather than men. I'm going to stand up to the government. And you have, Daniel, standing up to the king of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Well, the difference with these men is that they trusted God. They knew that their lives were in God's hands. And so when Daniel spoke up, it's because he trusted God. It wasn't that he didn't think that he might not be killed, right? He was risking his life. There was a very good chance that he would be killed. And in fact, they did throw him into the lion's den, and then God closed the mouths of the lions. But he did what God asked him to do. And so in that way, he demonstrated that he feared the Lord. And what we demonstrate with our silence is that we fear man instead of the Lord. And I love that you're pointing out that we are coming to an inflection point, certainly, in this country, that God is forcing us to choose. And we were talking about this a little bit over lunch today, that there really are no neutral institutions anymore. There is no neutral ground. We've seen the battle lines now become clearly drawn, and the church has a role to play. And what I hear you saying is, play it. right? You're not here for no reason. You guys were literally born for this time in human history. The question is, are you going to or are you not going to be on the side of the Lord?
I think often of someday you'll be dead and you'll be in heaven because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sins. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, with no less days to sing his praise than when we just begun. Imagine you've been in heaven for 10,000 years and you're walking the streets of gold. It's great. You meet Moses. Maybe Moses will invite you to his place. Now, I don't know what it's like in heaven, but Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions, many dwelling places. I bet Moses will have a pretty nice place.
I would think so.
He probably will.
He might have the corner lot.
Yeah, he might have one of those fireplaces where the logs don't burn out. Those like the burning bush in the wilderness.
Yeah. It would be appropriate.
I heard one preacher say, in heaven you'll travel as fast as you think, and I'll probably show up late. My wife will say, where were you? I was thinking about something else. I don't know. But let's say we all finally get there. After the small talk's over, you say, Moses, tell us the story. What was it like? I read the book. I even saw the movie. But here you are in person. And Moses stands up. The room gets quiet. And he goes, it looked bad. The government was trying to kill us. They had their chariots. They were riding in. And people were screaming. And I just stood up against him with the staff. And I said, God, use me to deliver your people. And the waves came in and swallowed up Pharaoh's chariots. We're going to say, wow. Then we're going to look around the room and see David. David, tell us your story. It looked bad. Goliath was wanting to kill us. And all these grown-ups were too chicken and scared. And I said, enough. And he takes a sling and hits Goliath in the head and takes his own sword and chops his head off. And then we're going to see Esther. Whether I die, I die. I'm going to go in and talk to the king. And it's going to be real exciting. Then everyone's going to look at you. Say, we haven't heard your story yet. Tell us, what did you do when it was your turn to be down there on earth? What were they saying about God in your country or the baby that the Lord knew in the mother's womb? What did you do when the whole world was against you? And I'd hate for any of us to be up there and Jesus walk in the room and a big screen come down and him show all kinds of great things happening and people coming to the Lord and him saying, this is what I had planned for you to do down on earth, but you just didn't have enough faith and courage. And you look back at your life and that mountain that held you back was a little anthill, little fear of man. Yeah. What are people going to say about me? I might have people post something bad about me on the internet. That might be blocked or canceled. Yeah. And you can't go back to earth and do anything else for Jesus because you're already in heaven because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sins. But guess what? We're still on this earth. We still have breath in our lungs. We still have feet. This is still our chance to do those great things. No coach saves the worst athlete to the end. He saves the best. He saves the fastest runner to run the last leg of the relay. Yeah. I think instead of it being, it looks bad, come quickly, Lord, rescue us. It's like, no, you're the star player. He chose for you to be alive in this generation at this moment. And all the heaven is sitting on the edge of their seats, rooting you on, saying, okay, go for it. Look at this. This is our chance to do it.
Yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat. Bill Federer, you are a national treasure. I love this. I knew I would love it. Our time has gone by so fast. We're going to come back and record another episode. In the meantime, tell people where they can find you online.
Well, thank you, Heidi. My website's AmericanMinute.com. I send out daily emails and have books and videos, but it's AmericanMinute.com.
AmericanMinute.com. Bill Federer, it's been a delight. Thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Heidi.
For more information on my guest today, you guys can go to the show notes. I hope that you are taking notes today. I hope you're encouraged. Bill, as always, had me on the verge of tears several times today. You guys know that we are living in extraordinary times. What a time to be a Christian. What a time to serve the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You guys are here for such a time as this. The question is, what will you do with the time that God's given you? I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor today, notconsumed.com/Heidi. Check them out and make sure and get into your Bibles. If you want to read through the Bible with me, you can go to HeidiSt.John.com and check out Faith That Speaks. And I'm taking women through God's Word this year. You guys, getting in the Word of God will change your life. Remember, when we pray, we're not just doing it to say thank you to the Lord and acknowledge the things He's done. We're asking Him for directions. Father, what would you have me do? I hope this has inspired you as much as it's inspired me. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you right back here again at the intersection of faith and culture.